Hey there. Ready to dive deep into some cutting-edge chemistry?
Hmm.
And, renewable energy, too.
Sounds exciting.
It is. We're going to be looking at how scientists are tweaking materials, like at the atomic level.
Wow.
Yeah, to make hydrogen fuel production way more efficient.
Hydrogen fuel has so much potential to be a green energy source, but there are some roadblocks to actually making it a reality.
Exactly. And one of the biggest hurdles is we rely so much on platinum for this process.
Right.
Called the hydrogen evolution reaction.
The HR?
Yeah, or HR. It's essential for making hydrogen fuel, but platinum, well,
Expensive.
it's expensive.
He's like,
and scarce.
yeah, it's a bottleneck for sure. But what if we could find a material that could do the job just as well as platinum, without needing platinum?
Oh, that would be amazing.
Well, that's where this research comes in. It's all about a material called NiPS3,
Okay.
nickel phosphorus trisulfide.
NiPS3, nickel phosphorus trisulfide. Okay, paint me a picture. What's so special about it?
Well, picture a sheet, like atom thin. It has the potential to drive that crucial HR, but it needs a little help.
So how do we give it that push? What's the secret sauce?
These researchers explored something called defect engineering.
Oh.
Basically, they're creating tiny imperfections, like missing atoms, in the NiPS3 structure.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying intentionally creating defects, isn't that a bad thing? Imperfections?
You would think so, but sometimes these imperfections, if they're placed strategically, can actually enhance the properties of the material.
Really?
Yeah, in really surprising ways. Think of it like fine-tuning a musical instrument, Even just a slight adjustment can change the sound dramatically.
Okay, I'm kind of getting it. What kind of adjustments are we talking about here?
Yeah.
What did they do to the NiPS3?
Well, they looked into 3 types of defects: missing sulfur, missing nickel,
Okay,
and a missing pair of both nickel and sulfur.
interesting.
And they used computer simulations to see how these tiny tweaks, these defects, would affect the NiPS3's ability to produce hydrogen.
Gotcha. Okay, before we go on to the results and all that, let's just make sure we're not talking about something purely theoretical. Can we actually make these defects in the lab?
That's a great question. And yeah, the researchers thought about that too.
Okay.
They calculated how much energy it takes to create each type of defect and compared that to other well-known materials.
Okay.
And they found that it's surprisingly easy to create these sulfur vacancies, which means it's actually feasible to make this material in a lab.
So we can actually build this thing.
Yeah.
But here's the million-dollar question. Do these defects work? I mean, does tweaking the NiPS3 at the atomic level make it better at producing hydrogen?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
That's exactly what they wanted to find out. They focused on the 2 key steps involved in the hydrogen evolution reaction
Okay.
and how each defect affects those steps.
So break it down, Stormy, step by step.
Yep.
What's that first hurdle in this whole hydrogen-making process?
Well, the first step is getting a water molecule to split apart on the surface of the NiPS3. And the paper calculated the energy changes associated with this step for each defect type.
Okay, so what did they find? Which defect was the best?
Get this, the missing pair, so the nickel and sulfur vacancy.
Okay.
That was the rock star. It made this water splitting step way easier.
Interesting.
Energetically and in terms of speed.
Okay, wait. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Why would removing 2 atoms be better than just 1?
It does seem counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But removing that specific pair actually creates this perfect little spot on the NiPS3 surface where the split water molecule can latch on comfortably.
Okay, I'm picturing these tiny atoms clinging to the surface.
Yeah.
Why is this latching on so important?
What sets up the next step, where hydrogen molecules are formed, the fuel we're after.
So the first step is splitting water, and the second is about making sure those freed up hydrogen atoms stick around long enough to form the molecules.
Exactly.
All right, so how did our defective NiPS3 do in this sticking step? Did it manage to hang on to those hydrogen atoms?
Well, they found that pristine, defect-free NiPS3 isn't that great at it.
Oh.
But, you guessed it, that nickel and sulfur divacancy, it shines again.
Wow, this missing pair is really stepping it up.
It is.
So how does it compare to platinum, the current gold standard?
Okay, here's the kicker. The defective NiPS3, with that divacancy, is almost as good as platinum at holding on to the hydrogen atoms.
So we're saying that tweaking this material, just this tiny little atomic scale defect, could potentially rival platinum. That's amazing.
To help visualize this, scientists use something called a volcano plot.
A what?
a volcano plot. It shows the relationship between hydrogen sticking strength and how quickly the reaction happens.
I get the analogy, like finding that sweet spot for efficiency.
Right.
But volcano plot sounds kind of intimidating. Can you break it down for me like I'm 5?
Sure. Imagine a volcano and it has a peak.
Okay.
The higher you climb on that peak, the better the material performs in terms of hydrogen production. And guess what? Our defective NiPS3, with that special devacancy, it lands right at the peak of the volcano.
Ah, I get it. Okay, so we know the devacancy makes NiPS3 amazing at this.
Right.
But my brain is still buzzing. Why does removing those 2 tiny atoms have such a big effect?
Well, to get to the bottom of that, they dug deeper into the electronic properties of the material.
Right.
Think of it this way. The devacancy gives NiPS3 the perfect personality for attracting and holding on to hydrogen. It's all about how the electrons are arranged and shared within the material.
I love that. I never thought I'd be thinking about the personality of a material, but that makes so much sense.
It really does.
It's about manipulating matter at such a fundamental level, like playing with atoms as building blocks to create materials with entirely new properties.
Exactly.
Mind-blowing. So to recap, we started with this problem of expensive platinum.
Yeah.
We learned about NiPS3, and now we've seen how this tiny atomic scale defect can give it incredible efficiency.
And it raises some intriguing questions, about other possible divacancies. Could a combination of nickel and phosphorus be even more effective? It's something future studies could look into.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder what other combinations are out there just waiting to be discovered. But before we get too carried away, let's go back to those other defects, the missing sulfur or the nickel vacancies.
Yeah.
Did they find anything interesting about those?
They did, and it actually helps explain why that devacancy is so special.
Okay, tell me more. What did they find?
Well, it turns out that sulfur vacancy, even though it's easier to create,
Right.
it doesn't really do that much. Like, it doesn't improve the water splitting step or hydrogen sticking as much as the devacancy does.
So it's like good first try, but not the best. What about the nickel vacancy?
Oh, that one is really interesting. It actually makes the NiPS3 worse at the hydrogen evolution reaction.
Oh, wow. So removing nickel. Bad idea. Why is that?
It all comes down to that personality we were talking about, the electronic structure.
Yeah.
Removing nickel just messes up the balance of electrons.
Okay.
And it makes it harder for the material to interact with water molecules and hydrogen atoms.
So you're throwing a wrench in the system.
Basically, it just goes to show how important it is to understand those subtle electronic interactions when you're engineering materials at this level.
Right.
You can't just remove atoms randomly.
Yeah.
It's about precision and control.
Okay, so we're learning a lot from these tiny imperfections,
We are.
even the ones that don't work out.
Yeah. And, these findings, they help scientists working on similar materials and steer them in the right direction, like focus on the divacancies, that nickel and sulfur combo to get the best results.
This is all super exciting, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're talking about computer simulations.
Right.
How do we know this will work in real life? What's the next step to make this tech a reality?
Good point. It's still early days. The next step would be for, experimentalists to try to actually synthesize this NiPS3 with the divacancy.
Right.
They could use techniques like chemical vapor deposition
Okay.
or carefully bombarding the material with ions to knock out those atoms.
I can imagine that's pretty tricky, controlling those tiny little defects.
It is, but that's what makes nanotechnology so cool.
Yeah.
Scientists are always pushing the boundaries.
Okay, so let's say they do it. They make the material. What then? How do we test it, like for its hydrogen-producing powers?
Well, they would need to set up an electrochemical experiment, like a mini hydrogen production system.
Okay.
And carefully measure, the voltage they need to drive the reaction, the amount of hydrogen being produced.
So basically seeing if what happened in the computer happens in real life.
Exactly. And if those experimental results match the simulations, that would be huge for this approach.
And then we can really start developing practical applications.
For sure. But it is important to remember this is still fundamental research.
Right.
Lots of work to do to translate these findings into actual technologies, but this paper is a great roadmap, like a blueprint for scientists and engineers to follow.
It's like cracking the code of the material.
It is. We're learning how to speak the language of atoms and molecules, to manipulate matter at its most fundamental level.
It's mind-blowing when you put it that way. But let's zoom out for a second and talk about the big picture.
Sure.
This research, it's about hydrogen production, but I'm curious. Could we use this defect engineering for other materials and challenges.
Absolutely. That's what's so exciting about this research. It's a whole new world of possibilities. We're not just limited to tweaking NiPS3 for hydrogen.
Right.
We could potentially use this to create materials with all kinds of amazing properties.
Okay, you've got me hooked. Give
Yeah.
me some examples. How else could we use this defect engineering magic?
Well, let's take electronics, for instance. Imagine introducing specific defects into semiconductors,
Okay.
the materials that power our computers and smartphones.
So we're talking about messing with the guts of our gadgets.
Yeah, in a way. By tweaking the atoms, you could potentially improve conductivity, make them even faster,
Okay.
more efficient, or even create new optical properties leading to new types of displays or sensors.
So our phones could get even more powerful and smaller.
Exactly.
I can't even imagine. What about beyond electronics? Any other fields that could benefit?
Medicine, big potential there.
Okay.
Imagine designing biocompatible materials. Materials that can interact with the human body safely.
I'm picturing implants, prosthetics, all that.
Exactly. By introducing specific defects, we could tailor these materials to help cell growth, encourage tissue regeneration,
Wow.
or even deliver drugs in a super targeted way.
So we're talking about materials that can interact with the human body so precisely.
Right.
All thanks to these tiny imperfections. Incredible. Sounds like science fiction.
It does, but it's happening now.
It's amazing. It's a real testament to human ingenuity and our understanding of the nanoscale.
It is.
But I gotta ask, if this defect engineering is so powerful, why haven't we been doing it all along? What are the challenges?
Well, like we've been saying, controlling those defects at the atomic level is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
It's like performing surgery on a material, removing, adding atoms with incredible precision. It requires really sophisticated techniques and a deep understanding of how materials work at that scale.
So it's not just about removing any old atom.
No.
It's about the right defect in the
Oh,
right place.
Exactly. And to do that, we need the right tools and technologies,
Yeah.
powerful microscopes, to actually see these tiny defects, computer models to predict what they'll do, and really precise experiments to actually manipulate them.
So experimental and computational all working together. It's like this new scientific language.
It is a new language. And as our tools and understanding get better, we're going to see even more amazing discoveries.
So it's like we're entering a whole new era of material science.
Yeah.
We're not just limited by what we find in nature. We can actually create materials with properties we need.
We're going from discovery to creation, limitations to possibilities.
It's a whole new way of thinking about materials.
It is.
We're not just at the mercy of nature anymore.
Right.
We're becoming like architects of matter, building from the bottom up.
I like that.
It's exciting, but also kind of daunting, isn't it?
It is. We have so much power to manipulate matter,
Right.
but we have to use it responsibly.
Exactly. Just like any new technology,
Yeah.
defect engineering has to be approached carefully, ethically. We need to think about how these new materials could impact society, the environment,
Yeah,
and make sure we're using them for good, not for harm.
absolutely. As we delve deeper into this atomic scale design, we need to be really aware of the ethics involved.
Well said. It sounds like we've only just begun to explore what's possible with defect engineering.
We have.
What's the one thing you want our listener to remember from our deep dive today?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that we're on the cusp of a materials revolution. This research on NiPS3, it's just a peek into a future where we can design materials atom by atom with tailor-made properties. It's a future with limitless potential.
Yeah.
A future where materials science could solve some of the world's biggest problems.
It's a future full of excitement and challenges.
It is.
We're learning to control incredible power at such tiny scales.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to use that power wisely.
Well said. Scientific progress and ethical responsibility have to go together.
Couldn't agree more. And with that, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It has.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of defect engineering with us.
It's been fun.
And to our listener, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the world of science.